and Birmingham, using this opportunity to hear from families directly about their experiences and about what they hope will for the future for their stories. We're going to hear. Everyone should have a lunch and pass out. One of these cards that describes the cases that we're working on in this area. And we're going to hear specifically from the relative of Timothy Hood, who was killed in Bessemer, Alabama in 1946. It will be his nephew who will be with us. We're going to hear the story of Della McDuffie's life and death. She died in Alberta, right near here, in 1953. And finally, as I mentioned this morning, Rayfield Davis's relatives are here. He passed away in Mobile in 1948. So this part of our program will be chaired by the director of our Restorative Justice Program, who works out of Oakland, California, but really she's all over the country. Her name is Kaylee Simon, and I turn it over to Kaylee.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite the McDuffie family to come join us. I apologize that I'm interrupting your lunch. But we're going to actually start with the Rayfield Davis family. And we're going to focus on one family at a time, hearing what happened to their loved ones. And then we'll come back and have an opportunity to hear from each one of them about what they would like to see happen today. But I'll start it off with the Davis family. We have Miss Moffett and Miss Ulmer. So if you could introduce yourselves, explain how you're related to Rayfield Davis, and share with us what happened to him.
Good evening. I'm Nicole Ulmer, and Rayfield Davis was my great-great-uncle. This case was brought to us by the Northeastern University. Approximately, I would say maybe 3 years. And actually another sister of mine was helping with it, so she kind of backed out. But I think justice is due to him of what happened surrounding his death. So I kind of took it and kind of led with it. But on March 7, 1948, the perpetrator, and my love, the reason this case is so unique, the perpetrator is still alive as of today. 89 years old. Yeah. That makes it really stand out. But the perpetrator, and I will say his name, Horace Miller, and my great-great uncle worked at the same place in Brooklyn Field with the Coast Guard. During that time, President Truman was approaching Congress about, signing a bill where all of us would have equal rights. So they got on the bus, headed home, and apparently, putting my research together, it was dark in their ride home. So Rayfield had asked the perpetrator, Horace Miller, to have a drink with him after work. And he was just talking back and forth, he didn't think nothing about it. But as they approached the bus stop, of course, there was lights around it. And he noticed that the guy that he was talking with was a black descendant. So after Horace noticed that he was black, that wasn't sitting good, because there was already tension during that time, because did nobody want, to have everybody have the equals right at that time. So they didn't like what Truman was doing. So Horace Miller got really, really angry, because he said that I'm not going to, involve myself with a Negro. So and then by him asking him to have a drink with him, he thought that was just a no-no. So he got off the bus, and normally Horace would get off at another stop, but per the witness, he followed Rayfield off the bus. So they, one of the witnesses said they was having an altercation, and apparently, per the articles I found, that Rayfield was taunting, Horace Miller about we're gonna have equal rights, this and that, and which made Horace Miller really mad. So they had an altercation, and Horace Miller got madder and madder per the, the write-ups we found, that, he continuously beat him, to the point where he ended up in a ditch. It didn't say how he ended up in a ditch, but he ended up in a ditch and was discovered by someone that was actually out hunting frogs. So, and he discovered him by the noise that Rayfield was making, so apparently he was still alive at that time. So when he left to go, get the police, when they came back, they discovered that, he had already expired. So 2 days later, it said that Horace had returned back to work, and he read in the newspaper that they found a Negro on the ditch dead. So that's when he immediately contacted his attorney and turned himself in with a written confession, signed written confession, was given a bond of $2,500. $2,500. So went to court, and he was tried by 12 white jurors. They found him not guilty. Not guilty. So towards the end of this, the NAACP was actually going to do a warrant against him, but so happened his family had gotten him out of town, and they did like a big banquet to relieve him of his ordeal and everything. So that's the story. Rayfield Davis, the perpetrator is still alive today. There were contacts that were made, and when they discovered who was calling, he hung up. So that's where it stands at right now. I've done a lot of research on it because I'm trying to put a picture to a name. Right now, I don't have that opportunity to have a picture. I couldn't find his grave site. That was a wild goose chase. Come to find out, they had a makeshift headstone where somebody carved his name and date of birth and all that. And I guess due to over time, half of the headstone was gone. That's why I couldn't find it. But lo and behold, him and his mother buried in the same place in Mobile, in Magnolia Cemetery.
Ms. Olmer, thank you. Do you want to say anything about how this has impacted you or your family?
Well, I'm actually more the emotional person than my cousin, and I have a gift of empathy. And what is startling to me about this entire case is even the most basic legal education, when you go in as a 1L and you brief a case, they give you this little acronym, maybe CREAC or IRAC, as a guide for briefing a case. You got your issue, okay, whether this man was killed or not. Then you have your rule, your application, and then your conclusion. And so if I were a 1L student and I looked at this case, so was this man murdered? Whether he was murdered or not, yes, he was. What's the rule about murder? Okay, I would look up the Alabama rule, Constitution 1901 or whatever in regards to the definition of murder. How would I apply it? I wouldn't even have to apply it necessarily, because this man admitted he killed a man. It's written. I've always heard if it's not written, it's not real. So he wrote, I killed him. The madder I got, the more he talked about his dream of being equal to his white contemporary, the madder Mr. Miller got. And the conclusion of the matter is not concluded. Mr. Miller is still alive. Our loved one, Mr. Rayfield Davis, is dead. Okay? And in terms of the emotional aspect of it, we never, as children growing up, we never heard the entire story of his death. And I believe that it was only a rumor. Well, you know, you had a relative that died. He was killed by, they used to say, a KKK member, you know. But he was killed by an angry man. And I believe that they shielded us from that knowledge because they didn't want to spark fear in our hearts, because there were so many cousins and nieces and nephews at the time. And so they kept that information from us. But as Nikki and I read more about the case, the homestead for our family has been 963 Tennessee Street all of my life. And we all grew up there. When I say many cousins, we grew up there. And Mr. Rayfield Davis, our uncle, he was bludgeoned and he was left to die in the ditch that is directly in front of the house where we grew up. As children, this is the thing. As children, we used to play in the ditch. We fished for crayfish and frogs and everything else. We were there. We were there. And there's a scripture in the Bible that says the life of an individual is in the blood. And so the blood from our uncle was streaming through the little ditch while we were playing in it. So in my mind's eye, our hands and our feet were anointed with his life, even though we never saw him, never met him, never laid eyes on him. In fact, he died in 48. My father was born in 49. But our lives were touched by his life. And our family, we're unapologetically Christians. And our only solace so far in this matter has been a passage of scripture. I believe it's Psalms 103 and 6. It says, the Lord executed judgment and righteousness for all that are oppressed. And so our uncle, Mr. Rayfield Davis, he was oppressed. And the idea, the dream, just the thought, the dream of being equal as a grown man, 53 years old. Horace Miller at the time was 20 years old. So this wasn't just a matter of race. It was also a matter of respect for your elders. This Mr. Rayfield Davis was 53, 30 years his elder, and the audacity of him to put his hands on our loved one is unfathomable to me. But because of the racial climate at that time, it was okay. It was okay. And Mr. Davis's story reminds me of the character in the Bible named Joseph, in that when he had a dream, his brothers became enraged because they didn't like his dream. And they didn't outright kill him, but they put him in a pit to die. And our loved one being placed in that ditch is reminiscent of Joseph being placed in that ditch. But ultimately, he became the victor and not the victim. Now, we may not be able to bring my uncle back to life, but we can get justice for him. And we won't stop until it's done, because our hands have been anointed for the work. Our feet have been anointed for the work. And we are so grateful to this great organization for taking up this cause on our behalf. And so we want to say thank you to everyone, and our hearts go out to everyone who has lost a loved one through senseless violence and under the umbrella of racism. And I pray, we hear a lot about Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. We're all precious in God's sight. And his desire is not that one would perish, but we would all come into the knowledge. So I'm just grateful to be here today. Thank you so much. And may God continue to bless all of us to be able to take up a righteous cause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and we'll come back to you about talking more about justice after we hear from the two other families, but I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Gaskins about your relative Timothy Hood.
Good afternoon. My name is Henry Gaskin, and my uncle Timothy Hood was killed after he returned out from the war. Timothy was the oldest child of a family of three living in Bessemer, Alabama. In fact, we were all born in Bessemer, Alabama. And he grew up a child, not being in trouble or anything, finished school. And I like to say that he courageously entered the service. Went to war as a U.S. in the United States Marine Corps and served his country courageously. He came back with a high ideal of entering college, getting married, raising a family like everybody else. He lived at 2209 Exeter Avenue. It was a stable family. Nobody had ever been in any trouble whatsoever. Everybody was enrolled in school. My grandfather had a job that he had held over, I guess, 20 years. He was a homeowner. He was raised in a Christian family. And all of a sudden, he comes home and he decides, as a young man, as young people do, that he wanted to go out. So he caught the bus, and during that time in Bessemer, in the Bessemer area, black people had to get on the bus, pay, get off the bus, walk to the back, and then get back on. Okay. But anyway, he did that, and it was crowded. We were going through a primarily black area, you know. So there was primarily black people on the bus, and maybe a couple of white people. So what he did, they had the colored sign. One side said for whites only, and the same sign on the other side for colored only. So he moved the sign up a couple of seats to relieve the crowded situation there. And the driver said, well, this is too long, you can't do this. And he said, put it back. And he told him, well, you put it back yourself. One thing led to another, and the driver pulls a gun. Shoots him several times. He was able to leave, get away, and he ran down the street a couple houses, went behind his house. In the meantime, a member of the Brighton Police Department, Officer Fant, F-A-N-T, heard the noise, and he walked up, got his gun and all that. Walked up, and he asked the bus driver what had happened. He said that this nigger had attacked him. And, he has the gun, he's attacked him. And he shot him. And he's gone down that way somewhere. And Fant followed the blood because he was bleeding profusely, having been shot 3 or 4 times. And sure enough, he was on the back porch somewhere, and this lady was trying to stop the bleeding. So he walked up to him, put your hands behind your back. And he escorted him. By that time, the police car had come. And they put him in the police car face down. And then Fant was heard to have said, if you won't talk now, nigga, you'll never talk. And they pulled out a 44 Magnum. Tremendous velocity, damaged his arm. Shot him in the head. In the back of the head to the collar. And I've heard rumors and various testimonies and whatnot over time. And it was said that they even found brain matter on the floor of the head. My uncle was the uncle that I never knew, because I was born in 1948. He came back, he served in one of the most heralded and well thought of branches of service. The Marines were first on the ground and all that, So that was a very courageous thing. He went to fight for his country. And he fought overseas. And many times when black men went to service, the service, I think Eisenhower was the one that desegregated the service. But you could have a college education or whatever. You washed pots, You did things like that, menial things, clean up, that kind of thing. They were very, very reluctant about putting a gun in your hand. But we have family photos of him proudly in his didn't just go over there and watch fires. Not to down anybody who did that. And it has been a tremendously traumatic period for me because that was my only uncle. That was the only one that I would have had. So, that's it.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn it over to the McDuffie family. We have Mr. Williams and Mrs. McDuffie.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am proud to say Della McDuffie. This is my older brother, Wilbur Williams, and we're here to discuss not just Della McDuffie, but Will McDuffie also. My grandfather and my grandmother. In 1953, my grandmother, who was totally confined to a wheelchair, wherever you put her, she stayed. She had limited use of her hands, was killed. And she was killed by the state-sanctioned agent of the state of Alabama. Lumi Jenkins was the High Sheriff of Wilcox County, notorious sheriff of Wilcox County. And researching my family's history, I found that there was a book written by his granddaughter. I did not purchase the book. I read it, glanced through it online. And she glorified this man. She glorified a person who was an absolute terror. You could say he was the Ben Laden of Wilcox County. And I was so angry, I wrote an email and I said to her, how dare you? How can you sing the praises of a man that would kill a paralyzed woman? Of course, I didn't get an answer back, but I was able to get it off my chest. She needed to know her grandfather was not that hero that she portrayed in that 400-page book. On a Saturday evening, night, my grandparents owned a boarding house cafe. Now, if anyone's familiar with Wilcox County, Dallas County, they were the sawmill town. So they had a boarding house where the sawmill workers lived during the course of the week and returned to whatever other places that they came from. And so they provided them with 3 meals a day, room and board. And this Saturday night, and also in here, they had a jukebox, so, you know, that's where everybody came to rock. And Saturday night, Mr. Jenkins came in and told my grandmother that, I'm going to say it, I'm sorry. White folks was offended because the nigger music was playing after 12 o'clock, which is white folks Saturday. Bottom line, I said what it was. And he wanted her to turn that jukebox off. Well, she said to him, Mr. Jenkins, you know I can't do that. And Mr. Jenkins did know she could not do that, because that man came by my grandmother's and grandfather's place 2 and 3 times a week and ate for free, talked to my grandmother, so he knew she could not get up and go turn the jukebox off. So during that course of the time she's trying to get someone to turn the jukebox off, he says to her, get up, old lady. He struck her 1 time on 1 arm, do it again, struck her and broke a bone in 1 arm. The last blow was to her head, and he cracked her head open. During this whole melee, there were shots fired in the floor, found by her feet. There were shots fired into the ceiling of their business. And of course, everyone in the business just dove for cover, run for cover. My grandfather came back in to find his wife slumped over in the chair, and I think I did not learn until later, these two people, my grandmother was 62 years old. My grandmother and grandfather, my grandmother was 13 years old when she and my grandfather got together. These folks that lived together since she was 13 years. My heart ripped as an adult. Can you imagine? Here's a woman that you've been with since a child, literally. And within an hour, my grandmother was dead. They sent for the doctor, who was white. He came, he pronounced her dead. In handling of the body, this whole thing, I call it the terror strip. He has a doctor who can't be honest about what he's diagnosed, what he's seen. My grandmother's taken to a funeral home. What funeral home denies family access to viewing their relative? My dad was told no, he could not see his mother the day after she was taken to the funeral. It took him and two of my grandmother's brothers to intimidate, and they were intimidating, to gain access to see her before they fixed her. And they did identify. Arms, one arm was broken, this one's badly bruised, and she had an actual break in her head on the left side of her head. And blood was still coagulated, where she bled from her ear on her neck. But you won't find that written anywhere. It's not recorded at all. I was speaking to the young man earlier, that when you look at their death certificates, 1 year apart, one in April, one in May, here are two people who died of the exact same thing, hematomas as a result of old age. My grandfather was found 1 year later by this young man here and my other brother. His body half in his back door, wet from the waist up, where he'd been drowned, beaten and drowned. Again, hematoma as a result of old age. I think one of the things that pains me most when I look at those death certificates is, they say their life was a lie. They call me a lie, because I'm sitting here telling you what really happened. They've called my parents a lie. They called him a lie. We know what happened to my grandparents. And the whole underlining story here is my father, like your uncle, fought. He stayed on foreign soil for 4.5 years. And I asked my father, I said, well, why didn't you get furloughs? He said, because they didn't want to pay for black people crossing back and forth to Atlantic. You know, you stay here and do what you got to do. And so 4.5 years, my father was away from his family. He fought the European campaign, the African campaign. It was a lie, the United States government, because I have it in writing what he did. When he came home, he felt he not only by birth had earned the right to be treated like a man, but he has showed you, I put my life on the line for you, so you know that I can be treated like a man and respected. Well, he stepped out of line. He became an active NAACP-er. He wanted equal rights for votes. He prepped people for that dreaded registration test, voters registration. He did. And his parents, unfortunately, paid the cost. My grandparents were killed to intimidate my father, because he would not be intimidated. But he was so vocal. I think sometimes we liken him to the Medgar Evers of Wilcox in Dallas County. Because if they had done something, somebody would have said something. So you pick at the lower end. And it was very, very coincidental the night my grandmother was killed. Not only was the local sheriffs and deputies there, but 2 state troopers. Why? No one knows. But they sat there watching Della's place for a long time that evening. Till the fact is they got drunk while they were sitting out there. And so part of the understory is that it got out of hand because the boys had drank too much. So in their favor, my grandmother wasn't supposed to be killed, but she was supposed to be injured so that my father would be intimidated. She was killed, and they covered it up. From start to finish, they covered it up. And they still cover it today. You can't find anything. I think I could even, my grandmother was blatantly murdered. My grandfather was found dead. Even if you put on the death certificate, found under suspicious circumstances, I could deal with that a little better than to say he died from old age. He didn't die from a result of a disease caused by old age. They killed him. So I think I do talks for my grandchildren. I did it for my children, but I've been blessed to have that video that I taught around to high schools with my grandchildren and young folks that I interact with. And I want them to know there were 3 stories on there. Multiply that by thousands. I was lucky. I know where my grandparents are buried. There are thousands out there no one will ever see again. Have no idea of where they are. They went into the river. They got hung in a tree and rotted. You know, I'm very forthright with these children. They need to know. We all we're walking on someone else's shoulders that we should be so proud of. We can't stop singing their praises because we are where we are because of what these people were willing to give for us. My grandson, he'll just go, yeah, I know. I can't walk in the mall. I walk in the mall now because of what folks did before me. He's damn right. She walked in the So it's a constant conversation for us. We never forget. And that's what I want to happen. That the legacy of Della and Will McDuffie not be forgotten. But let's stop the lie.
All right.
They did not die of old age. Some very not caring, not loving, most hateful people decided they were not worth living. And I am angry. I will always be angry. I vowed I'd never set foot in the state of Alabama. From the time I was 6 years old, I kept that promise until my mother decided she wanted to move home. I tried to convince her to move anywhere. I'll buy you a house in the Bahamas. Don't go back to Alabama. This is home to her. This was her home. And she'd always try to tell me, don't hate the state. The state did nothing to you. It was a selective group that disappointed you in life, that impacted you, that hurt you. So the first time I came back to the state of Alabama, we left when I was 6. I was 48, 49 years old. And I can remember crossing that ugly bridge. And I used to refer to it as Mr. Pettis' bridge. I cried. I cried. I'm going home, but it hurts. It hurts because of the loss of what home meant. So today, as I said, we always are grateful to Margaret and this group of young folks who support us in our endeavors to let folks know that we lost people. You know, we lost people and they were not given their just due. When somebody puts in writing, I killed a person, and they say, good, now go home. How can we? How can we as a country tolerate that? How can we as a people tolerate that? You know, lie about my grandparents, but this man said, I did it. I did it. Is her cousin so worthless that he wasn't do justice? So, this is what I hope comes out of all of this. Give folks justice. They'll do it. Let's say we love them enough to give them justice. And I wish I could correct those two hideous pieces of paper that said a death certificate from the state of Alabama. But I've researched that. The doctor's dead, everybody's gone, and the state of Alabama is not ever going to say, okay, they lied. Let's amend it. We'll write a letter saying, yeah, more likely, I won't get that in this lifetime, but I know the story. So let's keep telling it. Never mind what the papers say, let's just keep telling the story. So everybody knows that these people, a lot of people, were never given the justice that they were due. Thank you.
Basically, I just want to add that I'm very thankful to Margaret and the university for giving us an opportunity to express this. I guess it was about 4.5 years ago. We had an opportunity to go to Massachusetts, and it was a very, very good affair. And I too believe like my sister did, and she's explained it a lot better than I would have been able to. It still hurt to come back to Alabama, but life goes on. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to give everyone up here an opportunity to talk about what you want to see have happen now. And some of you have actually initiated certain processes, and I'd like for you to have an opportunity to share what you're working towards. So I'll start with, again, the Rachel Davis family.
Well, it's been a process in doing what I'm doing, because I've had so many doors closed on me, as far as trying to get the street renamed after Rayfield. You have to have 90% signatures in order to have that done. And I've been working with a local councilman who blatantly told me we put the work in the parent, the people's hands and have them to do it, and then he'll supply it to the courts. That's an easy task to do right there. But the records are messed up because a lot of the properties don't have homes on them, and it's just like, what do I do? It's just like, and I've been working on this for 4 years now, trying to do that, trying to get something,
To validate his life.
Exactly. So, hearing their story, it's just, I'm like, wow, his death certificate mentioned homicide.
It says homicide.
Homicide, yeah. He wrote, confessing that he did this. So, dang if you do, dang if you don't. So what do you do? And, it doesn't speak good of him. When somebody contacts him, he just hang up the phone. So my notion is, what do you have now? Are you still feeling the same way you did back then?
Yeah.
Make peace with yourself. To be in almost 90, to not be remorseful. I just want to have that conversation with him. How do you feel now? Do you still feel the way he felt back then? That's always a question, because, you know, there's so much of this in the media now, racism. And to me, it's a learned behavior. You know, did you transfer these over to your kids? We'll never know that if we don't have that conversation. So that doesn't speak highly of him by not, you know, talking to us on the telephone. But if I had my choice, I prosecute him today. Just for that. You telling me that, you know, you're not talking to me. So that's the way I feel about it.
I want to say one quick thing about the case, which is that this is an example of where it appears that there was due process because there was a trial, but in essence he was acquitted, which actually protected him because of double jeopardy. And we see that in other cases where perhaps there's this appearance that they went through the process they were supposed to go through, but then there wasn't actually any form of justice. But I want to just say also, Miss Ulmer is an incredible organizer and just relentless. She's been working to try to get a street renamed for years and is extremely organized and determined. And I have faith that she and I together are going to get that street renamed, and that we're also not going to give up, and that we're going to keep contacting the perpetrator in creative ways and see if we're able to engage him. But we'll surely keep trying. But I just want to really note how long she's been working on that and how much effort you put in is incredible.
Yes, I am on a quest to try to make sure that my uncle is never forgotten. He was a citizen of Bessemer, Alabama. He was a legal citizen of the United States of America. He fought for the United States of America. We are presently in the process of trying to do the same thing with a street name or some type of memorial and or both. So, unfortunately, in places like Alabama, and other places too, not just Alabama, but you run into all kinds of surprising stumbling blocks. Political rivalries, you know, I want to do it, or why didn't you step on my toes, or we can't afford that, or you didn't vote for what I wanted you to vote for, and things like that. So it holds us up. But it's going to happen. I told Ms. Simon, it's going to happen. I'm not going to stop until it happens. Now, it may not happen in the morning, but it is going to happen. And, you know, you can't replace an uncle or an aunt. You know, they're the people that God put here to kind of act as a parent, but then act as a friend, so you can tell your uncle things you couldn't maybe tell your dad, you know, the birds and the bees or whatever, you know, things like that people are reluctant. You know, you go to your uncle or your aunt, and they, you know, they break it down for you. I didn't have that. They killed mine.
Well, I think one of the things that we would like to see have is the record straightened out. Just to have the record straightened out to show that they were killed and did not die of old age. And that to me would be very, very, very much encompassing. And I don't know if you...
It was a real coincidence when my sister-in-law called me and said, Margaret and Connie had reached out to me. I had sat and talked to 3 or 4 co-workers the week before, and they said, oh, you've been doing a lot of thinking around here. We almost smell your brain burning. And I said, you know, it's come, the burden has come on me to do something, and I need to do it. And they said, what? I said, I want to erect a memorial in the site where my grandparents were killed. And then I get this call, and it was like, and I may have the last laugh. I won't have to look for them to put a sign up with McDuffie on it. If you go right down the road here, turn a couple of rights and a couple left, there's McDuffie Street. But don't tell them, because they might change the name. I got the source to prove it.
Okay. I just want to thank them again for really sharing your story. back, you have a question?
I have a comment, yes. I'm like King Browder, just wanted to give my condolences and my thanks for your relentless fight for what you're seeking, what I want to say, what we all want justice for, and it looks different in everyone's eyes. Justice in your eyes, in your family's lives, it's going to look different for everyone, but we want justice, and that's what we're looking for. And so I too bear the same burden of carrying my family's name, as well as, I mean, I'm in New York City, so it's my first time in Selma, but in Alabama, so I'm grateful for being here. I did change my mother's street name to Khalif Browder, which is the story of Khalif Browder, what happened to him in New York City. But the justice is what I definitely applaud. You identified what justice looks like for y'all, and for everyone, we need to identify what is justice, because what we want as justice doesn't come by what they give us, and so we have to identify what we want and then get what we want in the ways that we want it. So I appreciate it. Thank you. God bless.
You want to say a word or two about your family member's case in a minute or two?
Real quick, my brother is 16-year-old black kid in the Bronx, New York. He was accused of stealing a backpack in which he then was sent to Rikers Island with this alleged accusation of stealing a backpack, sent to Rikers Island, which is a torture chamber. Spent 3 years there on Rikers being tortured, being just the title tortured, but he was starved. 4 days in a row, then given a tray of cabbage, and then another 4 days, and then given a couple of slices of bread, and then another 4 days, and so on and so forth. He was beat, and brutally. He was put in solitary confinement for 1,111 days for alleged accusation of stealing a backpack. And when he came home, after they realized they got the wrong person, a 16-year-old that they put in a torture chamber, solitary confinement, 1,111 days. They found out they had the wrong person. They released him, and he went home, tried to get his life together. He went to high school, he went to college, got his GED, went to high school, and furthered himself in college, and continued, got a 3.8 GPA. So he was trying, but what happened in Rikers really tortured him, and he ended up committing suicide, which in my mom's house, he committed suicide by jumping out of the backyard window, hanging himself, and my mom found him. And then she, as a collateral damage, suffering those 3 years with him, just like the whole family does, suffered with him. Then my mom found him hanging, and she then had a heart attack eventually, and lost her life as well from a broken heart. We did a docuseries with Jay-Z to tell his story, which I'm grateful a lot of people did hear his story. But marching in the street, and I started Black Lives Matter in New York City, as well as shut down Rikers in New York City. And justice is what we are all individually defining justice. It's not a check, which they'd love to write a check, give you money for it. That is not something that this family is looking for justice, so we haven't accepted their offer. We want justice, which is accountability, and that's why I said finding what your justice is important, because we want accountability. We want time served, or time given to these the perpetrators that hurt my brother, offended him, neglected, and didn't abuse him. Thank you. Thank you.
Before they leave to rejoin our audience, thank you so much for sharing, and thank all of you, each and every one of you, for bringing your stories to us. And I think before we move into the next session, let's just take a moment of silence to think about their stories and how they relate to our future and our future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica.